Well, thanks for coming, everybody. I don't know what else we could do on this snowy day here in Colorado, but I'm really happy to see so many people join us for what I think will be a very interesting presentation. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, and we'll get started with our presentation. So Lee Martinez will discuss the Y-DNA test, the most useful and powerful of the DNA tests for the purposes of genealogy. DNA can be a powerful tool in the genealogist toolbox, but it's important to know that there are different kinds of DNA tests, each designed to answer a different kind of investigatory question. Lee grew up in a Mormon family in the Espanola Valley of northern New Mexico. He was immersed in genealogy from a young age, scouring small remote cemeteries throughout the mountain villages in the area with his parents from the age of 10. Lee's parents served for a time as the local LDS family history librarians based in the valley back in the day when microfiche was a primary research resource. Now, with over 40 years of genealogical research under his belt, Dr. Martinez directly manages 24 Y-DNA accounts representing 13 surnames and consults with the NMGS DNA team on Y-DNA projects. So virtual round of applause for Dr. Martinez. Thank you for joining us today, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So over to you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And let me know if you see my PowerPoint.
We do.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. So thank you for that introduction. I clearly have a bias as far as Y-DNA, so I understand some people may have a difference of opinion, and that's fair. I am very passionate about Y-DNA analysis for genealogy and hope to share a few items on that. I put an introduction because Y-DNA, of all the DNA tests, requires the most expertise to work with and to interpret. There are, through the Family Tree DNA platform, there are projects and project administrators that go with those projects. It's really important to find a project administrator or subject matter expert to help with interpreting Y-DNA because it's not really presented to the average consumer in a way that's easily interpreted. I could spend half a day, I could spend all day just talking about this topic, but clearly don't have that much time. So I'm going to kind of dive in pretty quickly because I want to cover some areas that we normally don't have time for. So I'm not going to really talk about other kinds of DNA other than to just mention, obviously, that there are other kinds of DNA, autosomal DNA being the most common. I don't feel it's nearly as useful as Y-DNA, especially for genealogy 200 years and farther out. Okay, so this is the agenda. I want to talk about the power of Y-DNA and why is it that I say Y-DNA is the most powerful platform for from a DNA point of view for genealogy. I want to introduce the big Y, which is the more expensive, more value added test. Relatively few people have taken the big Y because, quite frankly, it's pretty expensive. Which kind of brings me back down to the rule of three. Excuse me. Sorry, the rule of four. The rule of four is a technique to maximize, because it's so expensive, you can't waste a test. And so every test needs to take you towards a strategy, towards reaching a goal. So that's what that's for. Probably the centerpiece of my presentation today will be a case study on how Y-DNA can be a real live example of how Y-DNA was used to solve investigatory questions. All right, so the power of DNA. I'm going to jump right in. Y-DNA is passed mostly unchanged from father to son, and that mostly unchanged is the key. Unlike autosomal DNA, Family Finder, Ancestry.com products that have themselves every generation, right? And therefore, after about 5 generations, totally useless. The Y chromosome almost can go hundreds of years and have no change whatsoever. And so it makes it a really good marker. The mitochondrial DNA actually mutates too slowly. I mean, you could go 700 years and not have a mutation on a mitochondrial DNA. So it's really hard. I have mitochondrial DNA matches at 0, that probably our most common recent ancestor was 600 years ago, and that's not very helpful for me. So every man on the planet carries a Y chromosome, which was carried by his father and his father and so forth. And so it's this marker that goes back virtually almost unchanged through time. And so this gives us a signal that allows us to build a genetic paternal ancestry tree of all men on the planet, the great tree of mankind. This is a generic version of it, right? All the way, you go hundreds of thousands of years, right? This is probably like 70,000 years ago. And you have these really ancient haplogroups. I don't know if there's anyone on here that has an ancient haplogroup like A and B and E and C. If you're from West Africa or South Africa, if you're from Africa, in your paternal line, this is probably where you're coming from. Then you have these younger, and these are the ones we're more used to seeing, these baby ones here, like R, it's very European, Q, mostly American, right? J, Semitic, Middle Eastern. And so, you know, these are like 15, 20,000 years old, 40,000 years old. So these are really old. And we'll get into that as we go. The tree is not growing at an even rate. So this is what the tree looks like right now from a conceptual point of view. And you will note that half the entire tree of mankind is an R haplogroup. So that's not fair. You have this one haplogroup right here that represents half of the entire tree built so far. And why is that? I have a theory that is based on socioeconomic factors. R is basically, you know, Europe. And so when you think about who has $400 or $500 to plop per test, I don't know about you, but most people don't have that kind of money to just, oh, I have $500 with nothing to do. I think I'll buy some tests. And then for Y-DNA, the more data you have, the more value you have. And for the big Y, you need a good, at least 3 tests to triangulate. So now you're into thousands of dollars. And so think about who would have that kind of money. And it's probably not folks from other parts of the world. That's my opinion. But kind of based on facts when you look at the tree. J is pretty big. If you have a Sephardic background, you might see J, and I here more is still Europe, right? So here's I right in here. J is right in here. So again, there for those of you who are of a haplogroup that's underrepresented, let me find it. If you're in an underrepresented haplogroup, you're a pioneer. Now, this is also super important because people ask me, that's a lot of money. Are these Y-DNA tests worth the money? And my response is, well, and is it a good test? And is it going to help me? And my response is the test is amazing. The problem isn't the test, it's your team. See, Y-DNA is very much a team sport. So if you're on the R team, you're good to go. You have this huge, thousands of people out there working on your line. And if you're like A haplogroup or Q, I mean, you can't even see it. So it depends on your haplogroup. And even that, it depends on the people who around you who have tested. So there is no one right answer. You can have 2 people who take the test, and one gets an amazing experience and the other one, nothing. And it wasn't the test's fault. Just like all DNA, it's about the database, right? It's about the team. All right, there's 2 kinds of DNA mutations, and you guys have probably heard this before. There are short tandem repeats or STIR tests, and then there's single nucleotide polymorphisms or SNP tests. To simplify that, those cheaper tests, the Y37, the Y67, the Y111, those are STIR tests. And then the SNP tests, and it gives you a estimated haplogroup that's usually 15, 20,000 years old. And then SNP tests give you confirmed haplogroups. Sometimes if the team hasn't really gelled, still be thousands of years old. Or if you're lucky and you're part of that R haplogroup, or you're on a group that happens to be carefully tended by a project administrator, it may be hundreds of years old or even 85 years old, right? We call those family clades. So these SNP tests are what you're getting from the big Y. STIR tests are what you're getting from those lower level, cheaper tests. completely different. They're different tests. So when someone says, well, I'm upgrading from a Y111 to a big Y700, it's really not an upgrade. Family Tree DNA is actually giving you a deal because it's a completely, they have to redo the test. And it's a completely different test, different chemistry and everything. Okay, this is, so genetic distance is kind of important. So here's like the Y12 through the Y111, and you can see genetic distance of what it means. And so in the past, you know, before the big Y got big enough to have a database to give you value, genetic distance is really heavily leveraged. I just want to warn people that genetic distance is a blunt instrument, especially with these Y stir tests. So these are the general, you know, interpretations of these kind of tests. So if I take a Y37 test and I have a person that's a 0 or 1 genetic distance, yeah, that's a close relation, right? 2 or 3 could be a close relation. I've had folks that are 3 genetic distance to me that are our most common ancestors 350 years ago. So so this is, just be careful. It gives you a little bit of an idea, but it's well, I'll give you some examples where this is very much a blunt instrument. All right, so the stir markers look kind of like this. It's like a stutter where it repeats, you know, GATA, GATA, GATA. How many times does it repeat? In this case, it's 8 times. In this kit, I just made this up. This is just generic data I made up. You have 4 different testers, and on marker X, you know, marker 12, marker 37, marker 111, whatever marker, right? If this is how that looked, you could say that this person here, kit 1 to kit 2, if all things were created equal, that's a 1 genetic distance, right? Kit 1 to kit 3 or 4 is 2 genetic distance. And you can see here, kit 3 and 4, they have 10 repeats, right? And it will look like this. So this right here is actually the Y12 profile for the Martinez family of New Mexico. So descendants of Hernan Martinez Serrano, you will have, these are your first 12 markers. And if you don't have these first 12 markers, well, you could have a 1 genetic distance, right? Remember, we went back to this, and it says if you have 1 genetic distance, few people achieve this close level of match. All confidence levels are well within time limit frame. So yeah, you could probably get away with still being a match if you have one of these off. But if you have more than one off at 12, you're not a match. And the more markers you have, the more genetic distance you can get away with and not be a match. So at 12, you can get away with just 1, right? And that's what this is telling us. At 12, you know, if you have a 3 genetic distance, there's no way. But at 111, you can have up to 9, right? So the more markers you have, the more genetic distance you can have and still be a match in genealogical time. So these are compared against the database, and this is how at Y37 or Y111 we're able to match you with your branch. So this is what the Hernan Martinez Serrano family looks like at Y37. And so you can tell who's taken the Y37, the Y111, those stir marker tests, and who's taken the big Y based on the color and the haplogroup. So RM269, thousands of years old, not very helpful. All it tells me is Western European. That's all it says. And then you have these green ones. Well, the green means that you have a confirmed haplogroup. These folks took the big Y test. These are family clades. These are branches in genealogical time that you can actually attach to a person. We may not know that person's name, but this is there's a person, one person, who was born at a given set in time that for the first time in human history had this haplogroup or this mutation in them. And then they pass it on to their sons. And this person probably lived sometime in the last 300 years. That's very genealogically helpful. Telling me that thousands of years ago, my ancestors lived in Western Europe, not so helpful. But I can leverage, if I just took the Y37 and I was this person up here at the very top, I'm matching very closely with these 3 people that took the big Y test. There's a really strong probability I belong to one of these 2 family clades, right? So there's a direct correlation between STIR markers and SNPs. And so the more people, if you took the Y37, 2 people take the Y37 and person 1 has no big Y matches, person 2 has 8 big Y matches. Boy, what a difference in experience for the test. Because in the one where I have a ton of people have taken the big Y and have these confirmed markers, one of these folks is probably my ancestor. So I want you to note here that, right, they're at Y12, at Y25, at Y37, well, almost a Y37. There's virtually no change, right? From here on back, I see no genetic distance, there's nothing. But then over here, you start seeing all these differences. So this is where I warn about genetic distance at the STIR level. Not all markers are created equal. I actually ignore a lot of these because they're useless or not useful. But the FTDNA treats all the markers equally, but they're not equal. And I'll show you that here in a second. All right, so here's what RM269 means. This is what, if you have RM269, it says, I'm from Western Europe. And what's the probability I'm from Western Europe? The farther west you go, the higher it is. 92.3% of all men in Wales is an RM269 person. That's incredible, right? That's almost every single male in that whole place is an RM269. Whereas in Poland, it's only a fourth. So see what I'm saying? It kind of, it tells you generally. But again, for genealogical purposes, not too helpful because we're talking about, the Iron Age, and I don't know if that's going to help me with genealogy. So you really do need to go to those SNP level, that big Y test, or be lucky and have other people have done the big Y test, and you're taking the lower level test in order to really get down to a family clade where you're dealing with haplogroups that are in genealogical time, no more than 400 years old or more recent. All right, so again, this is the you can see these changes here, right? But if you look here, this you would never find this in your toolkit. This is just something that I know based on research. What I have here are the markers 1 through 37. See that? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then through 37. And then here is the speed limit, if you will. How fast they ranked these they've ranked all 111 markers on how quickly they mutate. And if they mutate very fast, like this one, it's useless. And so you notice I've grayed out in these are matches, and I'm analyzing genetic distance, but I'm not using the genetic distance given from family tree DNA because I am removing genetic distances that make my number less accurate. So out of the 111 common markers, this dual marker here is the 110th and 111th, ranked 110th, 111th, meaning it's the fastest of all the markers. Much better is marker 7. Look at that. It's ranked 6 out of 111, right? So this marker here, and sure enough, no surprise, no changes, right? And that's the point. I might go 1,000 years before this thing changes. And so the more stable that mutation is, the more accurate it is to give me a sense for genetic distance. So for here, for example, this is the mid-tier. Now it's kind of in the middle, and there's these 3 people are different from these people. So that tells me that all these people are related to each other. They all have a common ancestor sometime in the last 300 years. And sometime in the last 300 years, there was a branching point where there was a son that had a mutation that the other sons didn't have. And this line descends from that one person. And so we will get to the point someday, maybe in 10 years, where we're going to be able to have, for example, Hernan Martin Serrano and his sons, and we're going to be able to identify which of his sons you descend from. It's only a matter of time before we get to that level. Now, it may not be each son, it may be a grandson or great-grandson, because these mutations change on average every 84. You have a, well, I don't want to confuse. Let me stick to STIR mutations. I'm now getting into SNP mutation changes. STIR mutations are all over the place, and they're ranked again from 1 to 111 in how quickly they mutate. STIR mutations are more stable, and there's a constant rate for a SNP mutation. We'll get to that a little bit later. All right, so this is what one of the things you get when you take like any of the Y DNA tests, whether it's a Y37 or a big Y, you're going to have your matches list, right? And so here you can see the genetic distance. So here I'm going to give you an example of why I say genetic distance is a rough tool. So I know all of these people pretty well and their backgrounds and their genealogy, and I can tell you that Jose Dolores Fernandez is no closer related to the person who owns this than William Michael Espinosa. These two people, the same common ancestor, the most recent common ancestor, same person. Yet this person has 2 genetic distance and this has 9 genetic distance. Yet I know that this means nothing. These numbers here are just random variation, and all it really tells me is nothing, because this person and this person and all the people in between have the same time to most recent common ancestor. Look at Sergio Pata. It's just 1 extra genetic distance. The difference between 9 and 10 is hundreds of years. As a matter of fact, the distance between this person at 0 genetic distance and this person at 9 is smaller than the difference between this person at 9 and this person at 10. So see what I'm saying? Genetic distance, it can be helpful. Yes, this person here is a 3rd cousin of this person here, whereas these guys are 9th cousins of this person here. But okay, that's what these numbers in this instance I know, because I know the genealogy of all these folks, right? So again, this person is this person's 3rd cousin. These people here, I'm sorry, 3rd cousin, 3rd time removed. That's a big difference. This person and this person, they're 3rd cousins 3 times removed. And then all of these are 8th to 9th cousins to each other. And then this person is way off the map, hundreds of years earlier in time. Oh, and I want to mention, so you see these haplogroups here. So QM3, that's 15,000 years old, thousands of years old, thousands of years old. This is about 200 years old. This is about 300 years old, and this haplogroup here is about 160 years old. This is a family clade. This is a family clade, and these are ancient, and this is 15,000 years old. So you go from, I mean, there's a literally 15,000 year difference between the haplogroups on this matching list. So you got to be, I'll be kind of beating this dead horse when people say I'm QM3 and someone says I'm QM3, we must be related. No, all it tells you is that 15,000 years ago you had a common ancestor that crossed the Beringia land bridge into North America. That's all it says. It doesn't mean anything beyond that. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the higher level tests, the big Y, and this is the SNP test. Now, SNP test is a mutation from one base, like a G to a C or an A to a T, at a single location on the chromosome, whereas the STIR mutation was like a stutter, right? And so it's this that builds that tree of mankind. The tree of mankind is based on this test. Haplogroups are based on this test. The only way to get a confirmed haplogroup is to take a SNP test, which comes back to this. This was built off SNP tests. So I want to give you a sense of how quickly this tree is growing, because it's growing like crazy and it's gaining momentum. So you can see here in my notes here, in 2010, there were 935 SNPs on the Y chromosome tree. So you could fit that entire universe on a single poster. Back then, 12 markers was a Y12 test was considered standard, and Y37s was like advanced Y DNA testing. So that was like 11 years ago. Now, they don't even sell 12 Y12 tests. Y37 is like the entry point, and Y111s are really considered a lot of markers, although you can get up to like 400 plus more STIR markers if you take the big Y. Although I haven't been able to see any value in those stir markers beyond 111. So 111, if you have, it's called Big Y 700 because you can get up to 700 towards stir marker tests also, but we're not to the point where we even know how to use those stir markers. So really, we're still at the point where up to 111 is all that's really useful for us at this point. So that was 11 years ago. In November of 2020, Family Tree DNA added 975 SNPs in just one tiny haplogroup. And that was haplogroup A. Look how teeny haplogroup A is. You can barely even see it. And so this one teeny tiny haplogroup grew in 1 year, greater than the entire tree did 11 years ago. So, and I know, like I said, I warned everyone I was going to beat this dead horse. I see people say, well, I'm EM215, and someone will say, oh, I'm EM215 too, or I'm RM269, or I'm QM3, I'm JM267. And then they try to, I'll hear, for example, oh, I'm RM269, and so I must be a descendant of Hernán Martín Serrano, because that's the haplogroup associated with that name. But no, again, all this tells you is Western Europe. At this level, these are the kinds of haplogroups you have, it really doesn't, you can't really have a conversation with another match about genealogy or anything. It's just too far out. The best it can do is it can tell you what continent your ancestor came from. Like I said in the show, and this is, like I said, the example. So I want to move, now that I've kind of talked about the difference between stir testing, Y37, Y67, Y111, and SNP testing, like the Big Y. I want to walk you through a case study of how I use Y-DNA to solve some problems. So let's start with genealogy, since that's what we are, right? We're genealogists. And so here we have documents. So I have this bond for Juan Pascual Martin. And then 3 weeks later, I have the marriage record for him. And then I have this baptismal record of their son. So this is important because this is my patrilineal line, my paternal line. These are the oldest documents I have. There's nothing on paper farther than this, and I don't think there's anything on paper that exists. So let's put a time frame here. Let's put it in this version here. So we have Juan Pascual and his wife, and we have the bond, the marriage bond, and the marriage record, and then we have this baptismal record for this man here. We also have a baptismal record for him, and between the bond and the marriage record, we know his parents between the two together, Francisco Martin and Felipe Lucero. And so here are the questions I'll get to this in a minute. Okay, so that's the genealogical record. Okay, this is what I have. And Y-DNA is about that paternal line, right? So this is on paper, this guy is I have a paper for him, and his parents are named. So this man, Francisco Martin, he is the farthest named patrilineal person I have. And so, of course, I want to know who's his dad, right? Because that's what Y-DNA does, paternal line. So that's the genealogical record. Then we have the historical record. So the fact that I was born, every day I would open my front door and I would look up, and there's Truchas Peak, and right, I see the lands of my ancestors. I can see I can see Jicarilla Peak, where my ancestors lived over the last hundreds of years. And I'm literally like 7 miles as a crow flies from the original colony in that valley. And my family is not, I haven't moved other than up that mountain and down the mountain to the valley. I know this area, right? I visit family up in the mountains and go to Peñasco, for example, or Taos. I mean, it's all, just a quick drive away. And I know the history of the area because, if you're born in New Mexico, you have to take New Mexico history. And oh, by the way, did I mention that I grew up in a Mormon family? And if you know anything about that family history is just part of our culture. And so I've been studying family history my whole life. So what do I know about the history? So I know that Vargas sent one of his lieutenants, Luis Granillo, to reconnoiter the Santa Cruz Valley. So that's all of like Santa Cruz all the way through Chimayo in 1695. And he noted, and this was documented, right? He's noting the presence of 2 farms in the Chimayo area near the head of the valley. And he remarked on the Martinez estancia at a distance of about half a league or 1.5 miles from the Tono Grande and the Captain Juan Ruiz farm on the boundary of the Tono land. So they're making comments and they're writing this down. And he recorded that the Martinez home consisted of standing walls only in 1695, and that 5 families were living in the ruins, and that they were Luis Martin, who had lived on the land prior to the revolt, and his married children. Now, this is super interesting because if you just read the quickie version of New Mexico history, they settled in the Espanola Valley near across from this what used to be called the San Juan Pueblo, and then within 10 years they've moved south to what's now Santa Fe, and you see Martin people in Santa Fe. But this tells us, wait a minute, one of the sons was living in Chimayo before the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. And after the Reconquest, they went back to their original lands, and there's no roofs. I mean, it's just ruins, but they're living in these ruins and building up back their houses in their original family house. That tells me that while now Martinez's aren't like the big families of Chimayo, they were the original families of Chimayo. They were first. They were there from the very beginning. They were, for at least 100 years, they were the family of the area, but then they dispersed. There's another document, a petition for land in Chimayo in 1706. So this is 12 years later, which mentions many of the important figures and events that influenced the settlement of Chimayo, both pre and post revolt. Now remember, I guess I should have pointed that out, that this person's parents are from Chimayo. See that? So my paternal line is in Chimayo at the earliest date. And so I'm looking for, when I want to answer the question, who's this person? I know that this guy is from Chimayo, and he's a Martin. Francisco Martin from Chimayo, married to Felipa, who's his dad. So the fact that this history of Chimayo is important. There are lots of Martins in Chimayo at this time, and they're the predominant family of that area at that time. And this is what really threw me off for the longest time. The only other record besides these records, sorry, I'm like all over the place. I've lost myself, hang on. Oh, yeah, the only other record is a man whose name's Francisco Martin, living in Chimayo, married to a Felipa, but her last name is Rivera, whereas my document has Francisco Martin, that's married to Felipa, living in Chimayo, married to her. This Felipa is a Lucero. Now that's not. I mean, so I'm like, are they the same person, or are these 2 men living at the same time with the exact same name that married women of the same exact first name from the same little village at the same exact time? I don't know. That's the question. Are these 2 people, is Francisco Martin and Felipa Lucero the same as Francisco Martin and Felipa Rivera? That's important because this Francisco Martin is a son of Luis Martin, who I just talked about, or son or grandson of Luis Martin, who we just saw the record was settling in that area. So before I go, I want to talk about why DNA to solve that problem. Why? So autosomal DNA is what people most know about because, quite frankly, it's the most heavily marketed. It's on television. You see CC Moore programs like Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. When people talk about ethnicity percentages from DNA or how they found a new second or third cousin, they're talking about autosomal DNA. It's cheap, relatively cheap for DNA. The cheapest of all DNA tests are autosomal DNA. So they're easy to market. They're easy to give away as gifts. The problem is that you can only identify ancestors within about 5 generations, no more than 200 years. And the problem I'm trying to solve, this is 300 years, right? This is way past autosomal DNA. Autosomal DNA cannot help me at all with this question. In addition, the Y-DNA is not only can it function at this time frame, but it's surgically designed specifically to answer the very questions I want answered. So these are my questions. Are these two Francisco Martins one and the same person? Who is the father of my Francisco Martin, the one that I have a document for? And does Y-DNA support the hypothesis that my Francisco Martin is a patrilineal descendant of the Martin Serrano line? So these are the questions I want answered. Let's do the DNA. Again, I've shown you this before. This is the Y-DNA profile for the Martin Serrano family. So this is easy. This question here is a piece of cake. It's just it's a yes or a no. There's no question. I'm either going to match this or I'm not. That simple. And if it matches, it strengthens my hypothesis that Felipe went by two different last names and it's the same person. So I get my results. I want you to look at the surnames. Do you see any Martinez's in there? I want you to look at the haplogroup. What continent is my patrilineal ancestor from? It's from the Americas. This is the 80%. Well, we'll read it down here. Haplogroup QM3 is the one of the Y chromosome haplogroups linked to the indigenous peoples of America. Over 90% of indigenous peoples in Meso and South America are QM3. And to a lesser extent, North America. Just like the R haplogroup that I showed you went from east to west, and the farther west, the more likely. QM3 works north to south. The farther south you go, the more likely QM3 is high. So by the time you're in South America, it's 90%. Mexico, 90%. And then it starts the American Southwest, it might be like 80%. And then by the time you get to Alaska and Canada, it might be 60% or something. QM3 fills the entire universe of the Americas. So that's interesting. And then look at the earliest known ancestors of people who have taken the test, right? Now, so look at the time frame. This guy was born, Nicolas de Espinosa. He's born so that he's in his early 20s at the time frame of the man I'm looking for, okay? So here's the Martin Serrano Y-DNA markers at 37. Here's my markers. Not even close. I mean, they could, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of years before you get to a common ancestor between this group and this group. Not even close. So that easy answer to that question. So here's a more advanced version. This is where, so this is 25 of my matches. Most people have, well, the best way you can get this is to join a Y-DNA project. This actually is an amalgamation of multiple Y-DNA projects. So I'm pulling from the New Mexico Genealogical Society DNA project, and I'm pulling from the New Mexico, where Mike Torres is the project administrator, and then I'm pulling from the New Mexico the New Mexico DNA project, which is Angel Cervantes, who's the project administrator, and I'm pulling from the Mexico DNA project. So you can see here the projects, I'm naming them, right? Where I'm getting the data from. And this is me right here. And this is these are my third cousins. This is my dad. This is my uncle. These are my third cousins 3 times removed. And you notice that we have a marker that the rest of them don't. We're all descendants. All the people on here descend from Nicolas de Espinosa. But at some point in time, a person was born. I actually know who it was. And that's the key. I can tell you who that marker is that was born with this mutation here. And that man passed it on to all his sons. So that in time, I have a third cousin. I have my dad, my uncle, my brother, my third cousins, and even my third cousin, third time removed, which goes pretty far back, 200 years. We all share this marker. That means we all descend from the same man who lived about 200 years ago. How do I know that? Because before 200 years ago, that marker didn't exist. You can see that these 3 guys descend from Juan de Espinosa, which is a son of Nicolas. And here's a different son of Nicolas. And here's, I think this is a grandson of Nicolas. And you notice that there are markers that identify those family lines. So I can actually tell now, not only are we not only is there a genetic distance, but I can tell you the branching point. I can tell you who that person was, who, when he was born, had a mutation, and it happened. I mentioned that for stir markers, it's like there's 111 markers, and they're all mutate at different rates. But for SNP markers, there's an average. Now it has a lot big range, but the average for the R, remember R is half the tree, so we use R data mostly. It's like 83 years per SNP mutation. I use 81.5 because our Q team has done our own work, and our mutation rate's different from the R. And so I use 81.5. Yeah, you're talking a couple years per, it's not that big of a deal, but I like to be precise. So this is where the combination of so here you can see the different haplogroups. You can have QM3 again. So these folks with QM3, they haven't taken those higher level tests, but you can tell these are family clades. These are family clades. These are family clades. No, I'm sorry. These down here, the Martinez's, we all have family clades. No one else has family clades. This QFT5172 is 200 years old. This is about 300 years old. These are thousands to tens of thousands of years old. So why is mine different from the rest of my people? Because I know what I'm doing. Well, I know how to do it, and I sacrifice the money. I'm not rich. But you really have to have a value to spend that kind of money. And I'll tell you, I've self-funded a lot of these tests because I've desperately wanted that data. But I'm tapped out. I can't do it anymore. My wife would kill me. If I bought one more DNA test, I'll be out of the doghouse. So they're expensive. And so one test isn't enough to be able to build family clades. You need 2 to 3. And that's part of the rule of 4 that I'll talk about later. Okay, so that investigatory question was knocked out of the park, right? So that's who is the father of Francisco Martini? Well, I actually answered that as well, to my satisfaction. If you remember, Nicolas de Espinosa is born in 1673. So if that means that when Francisco, so I'm guessing, I don't know when Francisco Martinez is born. I know when Juan Pascual Martinez is born, and I know this is his parent. So I can guess, right? I can say, let's say that Francisco Martinez was 19 when Juan was born, and let's say he was 43 when he was born. So that gives me a range. I'm going to guess that Francisco Martinez was between the ages of 19 and 43 when Juan was born. I think that's reasonable. And if that's true, then he's born sometime between 1696 and 1720, right? Well, when does Nicolas de Espinosa settle Chimayo? By 1700. Yeah, and he's in his early 20s. Now, does that mean that Nicolas de Espinosa is his father? I give it a 95% probability. Why not 100%? Well, it is possible that Nicolas de Espinosa fooled around, which he, by the way, had a record of doing. Early when he first gets into Chimayo, which, by the way, he gets married right away, so he's cheating on his wife. He has a child, and that child is a boy, and that boy gets a girl pregnant when he's 15 years old. Is that possible? It could happen. He's 13 years old and gets a girl pregnant, or he's 15 and he gets a girl pregnant. So in that case, yes, there could be a super young juvenile running around that's the son of Nicolas de Espinosa, who's Francisco's father, which would make Nicolas the grandfather. But chances are pretty low that that's the case. So 95% chance that Nicolas is the father of Francisco, and 100% chance that he's the father or grandfather of Francisco. So I've just answered that question. Who's the father of Francisco Martin? Answered. I know for a fact that it's Nicolas. And yes, I'll give that it's technically possible that he's the grandfather, but yeah, I don't think so. Either way, it doesn't matter. I still answer the question, where's the patrilineal line, right? And sure enough, you look here and you can see there's Nicolas de Espinosa, and all these Espinosa people. All right. So what do we know about Nicolas de Espinosa? So he was on the recruitment roll for the Juan País Hurtado expedition of 1695. He was a Coyote by nation, which means technically that he had one Spanish grandparent and 3 native grandparents. And I know that the paternal grandfather was native, right? Because of the haplogroup. He was a native of Los Lagos, now called Lagos de Moreno, located in the state of Jalisco, Mexico. He was 22 years old because I know he was born in 1693. And he was described in this expedition date, he's 23, as having straight black hair and scarred with smallpox. He has a marriage notary document in Santa Cruz. If you look at the Santa Cruz document that Jose Esquivel published, it says here's the very first people that settled Santa Cruz. He's on the list. So he's in Santa Cruz year 1, and within a couple years, he's in Chimayo and he's married. And then by 1720, he's dead. And that's all we know. And remember, I'm looking for a man who was born I'm looking for a man who had a child between these dates in Chimayo. And that's what I found. So now I've answered that question. Okay, the final question. Are these 2 Francisco Martins one and the same person? And they are not.
Armando.
This
Join the meeting.
So the Felipa Lucero and Felipa Rivera are not the same person, because my Felipa is married to a man from the Q haplogroup, and she's married to a guy who there's a document showing that her husband is a Martin Serrano. So I've knocked out all 3 of these questions, 1 test. I didn't even need the big Y test for this, by the way. That comes later. So how are we doing on time? It's 12 o'clock. I have a lot to talk about still, but as you can see,
You're good.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going until you tell me to stop. All right, so what Y-DNA can do depends on the time frame you're looking at, but it can support your research either within the time of known ancestors and back before your known ancestors as well. So I'm going to show you how I leveraged Y-DNA to even go farther back than documents to give them a sense of not almost tribal affiliation, which is really hard to do, especially that far back. You can think of Y-DNA as an ancient book, and every man is given a copy that's passed down. I'm getting emotional here. To all his sons. And every few generations, not every generation, but every like 3rd generation, one of the men in that line gets the privilege of writing a note in that book. I was here. I will tell you, I'm one of those people. And I had the privilege. I have a mutation that did not exist, never existed in mankind. And I have passed it to my son and my grandson. And I'll show you that. So unfortunately, they don't write the names and birth dates, right? It's just these mutations. But these are real people. I want you to they're real people. I'm a real person. And forevermore, that mutation will pass down, well, as long as there's male descendants. 200 years from now, I'm not, mutation 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm a person that in my mother's womb, I guess technically my mother created this mutation. I guess together we did it. This happens, right, in utero, right? I'm born with a mutation that never existed before, and now I wrote in that book. And that's how the tree's built. All right, so this is something that you only get in the big Y. And so these you might recognize, so are similar to that list of matches, but now it's put into like a tree. And these are so the little snips build a tree. So think about each one of these as a mutation, right? And every 81.5 years, someone is writing in the book. This is me, by the way. And yes, it's been named. I don't remember what it is, but there's actually an FT 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a name for it because family tree DNA, even though they're called private variants and unnamed variants, technically they're named. They're just not named and put out into the universe. They keep them in a database. If my son or my grandson were to take the test, it would get named and a new branch would appear. And my brother and my uncle and my first cousins would continue, FT 5172. And my branch, I'd have a new family clade, and that family clade would be 53 years old. How's that? A 53-year-old haplogroup versus a 15,000-year-old haplogroup. So this is why I'm telling people, you can do better than that 15,000-year haplogroup. You can do better than that 2,000-year haplogroup. I could, if I wanted to, I could have a 53-year-old haplogroup. That's a subbranch of a 200-year family clade. That's a subgroup of a 300-year family clade, right? That is where the value is. This 2,000-year-old haplogroup up here, not helpful, okay? So here's how I would read this. This mutation, it's not haplogroup, this is the haplogroup right here. This mutation represents Nicolas, and this represents a branching point. This is the Espinosa family of New Mexico, and some point about 100 years after him, one of his great-great-grandsons has a mutation, and that's my fifth great-great-grandfather. And by then, we have the Martinez surname. As a matter of fact, the Martinez surname happens generation one. As you recall, what I think happened is Nicolas Espinosa had a relationship with a Martinez Serrano woman out of wedlock. That boy takes the Martinez name, which I would. If I'm living in Chimayo and that's the predominant name of that village, I'd take that last name. That's what he did. Francisco Martin Serrano passes that name down. This man here settles in Las Trampas, and then his descendant settles in Llano Largo. And for the last 200 years, that Martinez line has lived in Llano Largo to this day. I know my third cousins lived there to this day. This line represents the Espinosas, and everybody, all my other matches, those 30 other matches I have are right here. Well, most of those 30 matches are here. Why is my so defined? Why do I have family clades and they have a 2,000-year-old haplogroup? They're not following the rule of 4 that I'm going to talk to you about. You can throw, this represents 3 tests, and this represents 3 tests, but my test.
You're on mute.
Someone muted me. Be nice. All right. So, all right. So, see what I'm saying is that it's you got to be careful. This is an expensive test. You can have 10 people take this test and not get any more fidelity than what you have. Whereas here, you can do it in 2 to 3 tests if you pick the right people.
Doug.
But
join the meeting.
I have some ages here. So again, this is 160 years old, 250 years old, 1,300 years old. See the difference. So these guys, all the Espinosas right now have a 1,300-year-old haplogroup. Okay, this is the genealogy version of this. So I'm going to say from FT33300, this right here, this is what it looks like. So here's Juan Jose Alberto Martin. He's born in Las Trampas. That's him. That's he was born with this haplogroup. How do I know that? Triangulation and genealogy. So this is really important. Genealogy, all these DNA tests, they're supplements. Genealogy is still the core. You still need those paper records. Those paper records and history give you hypothesis, and then the Y-DNA tests and other DNA tests can be used to strengthen or weaken your hypothesis, right? So this is, where am I? This is me. I took the big Y. My dad took the big Y. And my third cousin, third time removed, took the big Y. That's called the rule of 3. There's a reason why these 3 people were selected. It was not by accident. And if he were to take the big Y, it would be a waste of money, because this would tell me nothing more than I already know. All I needed was 2 closely related persons. The rule of 1 is you take the test, and then the second tester is a close relative. It could have been my uncle, it could have been a first cousin, it could have been my brother, it could have been my son, it could have been my dad, right? It was my dad that I selected. That's the second tester. The third tester ideally is a 4th cousin. I couldn't find a 4th cousin, but I found this 3rd cousin through time removed. I recruited him and had him take the test. That's the rule of 3. And based on that, I was able to triangulate. So here's FT5172. Here are my 3rd cousins that to which one? This one still lives in Llano Largo to this day. He's the pharmacist of that village. Roger here lives in Utah, I think. My uncle lives in Florida. I don't know where these guys are from. These are older gentlemen. They're from Llano Largo. Llano Largo, Llano Largo, Llano Largo. All these people are from Llano Largo. Juan Jose Alberto Martin. And so this is helpful. It's helpful when someone's born with a mutation and he moves, right? He moves up the mountains and then he has these two sons. Interestingly, he was fooling around with a neighbor. How do I know that? So there's this guy, that's a Lovato, these two brothers here, and they have a genealogy, but their genealogy keeps going as Lovato, but it's wrong. So here's the document that they have. Vicente Lovato, this guy, and his wife, don't know when he's born, suspected to be the son of Juan Domingo Lovato. No proof. Is he? He's not. Absolutely not. How do I know that? We shared this mutation right here. There's only one way to get that mutation. Only one. A father passes it to a son. There's no way. Either mine's wrong or his is wrong. And I have genealogy that keeps going another 100 years and he does not. So not only did it answer my question, remember our team sport? Sometimes you bet, just like genealogy is a team sport, you can take a low-level test. This guy took away 37. And sometimes they don't want to hear this is interesting. Not only is he a descendant of Juan Jose, but not only through his dad, but through his mom. There's his mom. His mom is a Martinez. Martin. Look at that. His parents are second cousins once removed to each other, which, by the way, is common, right? Here's my grandparents, also second cousins once removed through the Madrids of Llano Largo, right? Second cousins once removed, second cousins once removed. Look at these Munez family, right? I can almost visualize the Lovatos, the Martins, and the Munez, all, maybe even the Madrids, all living in early 1800 Llano Largo. How big could Llano Largo have been in 1800? I mean, how big is it now? It's not very big, right? All homesteading next to each other. Who do you marry? Your neighbor. Who do you fool around with? Your neighbor. And so here you go. So this whole genealogy here is represented right here. See that? So here's my dad. Here's that third cousin, third time removed. He's a one genetic distance that we've gone through. All right. So I think go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Martinez. We're going to have to wrap it up in the next minute or so because we've got to leave time for questions.
Awesome. So I am going to recommend I do another presentation because look how many slides I still have. I can go on. Like I said, what I was going to talk about was how I can even go farther back than Nicolas, farther back in time, and to determine and answer other questions like, were my ancestors from Jalisco or were they imported during the when the Spanish came? I have an answer for that, but I don't have time to go into that. So I will close and open up for questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Such a lot of good information and very interesting. So we'll go ahead and if anyone wants to do a question outright, you can just unmute yourself and raise your hand and we'll go ahead and get you in there. I'll go through the chat box and see if there are any questions while we're waiting for people to come up with other ones. Oh, first question, everyone wanted to know if there is a syllabus or handout that would be available for your presentation.
I can send my PowerPoint up to the point where I stopped.
Okay.
To you guys, and then you can have that.
All right, sounds good. Let's see. Adam Biros or Biros, I'm not sure. Sorry if I massacre your name, but says, I will use that mutation speed slide. This should be useful for my STR match who has just ordered a big Y. So that's just a comment there. Lee, how did your family feel when they found out that your original last name was not Martin or Martinez?
My family is fine. You know,
Just for Victor, that was my question.
yeah, no one cared. They were excited, and because we're, again, because of my religious background, there's a religious component to this, so it's not just curiosity. So we want the truth. We don't care what it is. I could have cared less. It could have been any race, it could have been any place, and I would have been just as proud. I just wanted to know where I'm from. That's all I care. And that's all my family cared about. Now other people outside of my family, when I talk about Y-DNA, I warn them. I'm like, be careful. Because sometimes people can't handle the answers you get, and not everyone, but my family is pretty open.
Okay, then we got Mary Lou Duran here. Mary Lou, if you want to unmute yourself, I see your hand up.
Hi, I'm just wondering, I had my brother take the Y37 test and he came out as a QM3 and he has maybe about 8 matches. How do I know if it's beneficial to have him or to go to the next level?
So look at his, if all his matches are QM3, look at the highest level test. For example, it tells you, here, I'll show you. If I'm allowed, I'm going to show you my matching list. Well, actually it's in here. I can show you, I don't have to show you live. I can show you, okay. So you can see here, it tells you what level test. This took one, these all took 111s, right? But it'll, because I'm at 111 and you can only go as high as the test you took. But his could say 37, 111, big Y. You can see what the 8 people have taken. If all of them have taken the Y37 and that's it, if he wants to be a pioneer, he can always upgrade. But otherwise, he's not going to get value upgrading because he's pulling everyone else up. Does that make sense? Right. So at the same time, if there's 8 matches and everyone's taking the big Y but him, that's amazing. I doubt that's the case, but that would be like, I'm like, upgrade, you know? So it depends on the team. What is the team taking? And if you're independently wealthy and or want to be a pioneer, you can pull people up with you if you want. That's what I did. I literally built my tree from the ground up. I went from a 2,000-year-old haplogroup to a 200-year haplogroup, and I built it purposely, but at cost, right? And so, so if you want the no-cost version, you follow the leader, not be the leader, and you just have to see what the other matches have taken. If they're a mix of 137, 167, you might want to just wait for someone to take that move. But you could wait forever. You could be waiting for a long time and never know. So you can either inherit a good team or you can build the team yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lou. All right, and Chris and Tom say thank you, superior research. E.A. Wallace, well, we answered that. Stephanie Gurin, thank you so much. I learned a lot, would love the PowerPoint. Rhonda Cordova says amazing presentation, thank you. Arian Paul says you have a question. Can you
well, one thing, Lee, not that I spent as much money as you, but I did pay to upgrade a Y test on one of my relatives, so I made that extra investment. But because I don't have on my New Mexico side anybody that I can test for Y because of my background being mixed up. But my question on the generational distance, since we've got the kind of the endogamous problem with the cousins intermarrying, and it really messes up the cluster tool, and it sometimes makes you look more closely related because you're sharing for more than one family line. You know, I'm just wondering how you look at that in relation to the whole generational distance.
Has nothing to do whatsoever, because what you just described is multiple different lines. Right. The Y-DNA test is just one line. So there is no endogamy. There's no mixing. It's one line.
Okay. This is okay. And Albert knows what it is. Yeah. Do you want to take it? Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I guess and like I said, my problem is I did figure out my closest Silva match to figure out the Y one time, but then I lost my note, so I have to find it again. So for me, for New Mexico, it would be a Silva.
Is that Silva your father's last name?
No, it was my great grandfather.
Which one? Was it your?
My first great grandfather.
Right, but you have 4 of them. So which one?
Oh,
Was-
on my father's mother's father.
Right. So the minute you switch to mother's father, that line is not your paternal line, which is fine.
No, I know. It's my only New Mexico.
Oh, got it.
wife group.
Yeah. So from that line back, a Y-DNA test is not affected by mixing because there is no mixing. You're literally looking at one line. All the other noise is completely gone. It's just blown away.
And
It's not even
you're
like that.
one of my matches. So now hearing about this Espinosa, I need to look at my tree in comparison to yours and my Martinez line just to see if that's where I'm matching you or not.
Thank you, Ariane. Williams says, I did the big Y. Would it help my son if my son did a big Y also?
If no other, well, how many other big Y matches does he have?
He doesn't say, it just
So if he
says,
doesn't have any close, if no one closer than a fourth cousin has taken the test, he should definitely have his son take it. Because here's why it names, here's what it does. Here's the problem with this form here. See the way they have these private variants? The private variants, when you have a close family member like a father or a son or a first cousin or an uncle test also, it names the private variants. That's what it does. The only reason that there's this one private variant here is because that's me. I was 5172 until I had my dad take the test. And when my dad took the test, it was discovered I had a mutation he did not have. So that's the problem here. That's the reason why these three people, this Mr. Cruz, Mr. Romero, Mr. Espinosa, they have this 1,000-year-old haplogroup, is because if either one of the, let's say all three of these people had their son take the test, you'd have 3 new branches. That's what we're missing here. If any one of these people were to take have their son or their father or their brother take the test, that person would absolutely, without a doubt, get a branch and a family clade. They would go from a 1,000-year-old to maybe a 200-year-old clade.
Lee, may I say something here?
Yep.
William is part of my group, so he matches 9 people at the Y 700. So if his son does take a test, it's possible that there'll be a new branch for all of us.
So let me ask, so how many private variants does he have? Do you know how many private variants he has?
1 or 2.
Yeah, so it'll name those, it'll name those 1 or 2, and the branch will go back about 80 to 160 years. So if you're related to him within that time frame, you may fall under that branch. Sometimes it will create a new branch. For example, this branch right here, this BY9370, it happened by accident. Not by accident, but because this person here took the test, I recruited both these people. When they took the test, it split and it created this new branch. And these 3 people inherited, they did nothing. They used to have QL663 as their haplogroup. And because these 2 people took the test, they got a new haplogroup. So it's hard to say. But
William and I have the exact same haplogroup, PH3335.
So it's very possible that you would end up with a family clade that's even more recent if his son takes the test. If he has 2 haplogroups, it'll name at least one of them, if not both.
okay. All right, next question. I'll do a couple more from the chat and then I'll get you, Jacob, okay? Is it better, from Connie Romero, is it better to use my dad or my brother's Y-DNA for additional testing? Also, do you have anything on Pedro Espinosa, 1800 to 1850?
No for the second, because it's not really my expertise. But the first one, I would do the dad.
Okay.
I would go after the older person, because in the future, I always go for the oldest person that's living.
Okay.
And that's what I did, right? That was my dad took the test, not my son or my brother.
Okay, very good. Rita says, where do I order the big Y test from?
Yeah, there's only one company that even offers Y-DNA testing, and that's Family Tree DNA. It's not really a cell, but there's a special, because they had that big Roots Tech conference. If you go out to the web, different places, there's coupon codes. So you can save 10, 20 bucks if you get that coupon code, or you can wait till a National Y-DNA Day, which I think is like April 27th, or the week of Father's Day. Never buy it retail. Always buy it when it's on sale.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so Jacob Shavira, if you want to unmute yourself and.
Yeah, I have a question, Lee. So I read online that you offer like consulting or you lend your expertise for people that are that have done the Big Y. So could you just explain, a little bit about like that and how, we might get in touch with you to
Sure.
to look at the results?
So I'll give you my email address. By the way, no charge, right? I don't charge for this. I don't charge for anything. This is my hobby, right? I do this for fun. This is how I do this and trimming my tree outside. That's what I do for de-stressing. So I don't charge anybody. I do ask that you give me your kit number and password, but if you don't want to, we can send screenshots back and forth, but it just slows us down, but it's up to you. My email address is almart24@asu.edu. Alpha Lima Mike, Alpha Tango Romeo 24@asu.edu. And the first thing that I tell people in consulting is they'll get their results and it'll say, your test is complete. And so right off the bat, my first piece of advice is, no, it's not. Y-DNA, when they say the test is complete, that doesn't mean it's ready for analysis. So right off the bat, my first thing I tell people is wait 2 to 3 weeks. Call me back in 3 weeks, because there's a step called manual review that happens after the test is complete, where all the new branches are created. So where do you find? You either know that or you don't know that. There's no instructions to tell you that. Nothing on the website or your homepage says results completed. Wait 3 weeks before you start analyzing. So right off the bat, that's the first thing I say when they reach out to me. I'm like, call me back in 3 weeks, and then we start. And then I walk them through how to interpret the results, and then I walk them through putting together a testing strategy because it's so expensive. And again, my whole feedback is, how do you get? I'm going to drive you towards, if you want, how do you get a family clade? Because again, that's why I keep saying these haplogroups are not helpful. And for genealogy, they're too old. And all it takes 2 to 3 tests, and you are going to be within genealogical time frame, building trees, and answering questions that cannot be answered by paper. I'm telling you, in 10 years from now, we're going to know, like the Martin syndrome, we're going to know which son or which grandson of that Hernán Martín, and we're going to know where Hernán Martín, what part of Spain he came from. We're going to know. It's only a matter of time. We're only lacking data. So super exciting. And that's why I talked about how the tree has grown in 11 years, right? And especially if you're our haplogroup, I'm jealous for you, our haplogroup people. Well, partially jealous. Remember, I have 4 grandparents, so I have 4 different tests going on. I have the Martinez Estoril and Espinosa. I have the Sanchez Estoril Lopez. I have the Archuleta that's actually not Archuleta, that's a native line. And then I have the Trujillo, which actually is truly a descendant of the Trujillo family in New Mexico. So I have a J haplogroup, an R haplogroup, and 2 Q haplogroups. So I'm doing all 4 of my paternal lines, right? So, but again, like I said, if you're Sephardic, we're going to know. We're going to know what part of the world that Sephardic line came from. 10, 15 years, I'm telling you, we're going to know.
Yeah, mine's a Q, so QM242 is my predicted. So I think I may be a pioneer. We'll see.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's usually what Qs are usually when you get your results. It's like you're like, there's no one out there.
Yeah.
But then you can build it.
Right. Thank you very much, Jacob. We're going to take one more question with a hand up here. So Sandra Garcia, if you would please unmute yourself to ask your question, and then we'll have to cut it off because we have to do our meeting and we're running out of time. Go ahead, Sandra. Okay, maybe she stepped away. Oh, there, no, okay. All right, well, I guess then that's because Sandra must have stepped away. Let me just make sure. All right, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Dr. Martinez. That was a really informative presentation. I wrote a bunch of notes. So,
Yeah,
I'll
we need
be
to,
reaching
we
out
need
as
to
well.
get you back for the rest of your presentation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll have Joe, our vice president, reach out to you to arrange for a date. Okay, so
Sounds good.
that sounds wonderful. All right, thank you so much.